Okay. Genesis chapter 19, I think is where we got to. Everyone good this morning?
Amen. Yes, sir,
brother. All right, Genesis chapter 19, and here we end up seeing the basic, pretty much life significant discussion about Lot and his family. And so we've come through all this, and now we had Lot get kidnapped and taken prisoner there earlier. And the thing about it is that when you sit down and think about that aspect, it'll give you a little bit of insight to where Lot is when these first few verses come in. But notice in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, there came two angels, and this is the same angels that was in Genesis chapter 18, that came by Abraham with Christ to basically give him the forewarning that Sodom and Gomorrah is fixing to be destroyed. They came to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, behold, now my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they said, nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed them, knowing what was happening if they stayed in the street, and basically pretty much coerced them upon them greatly. And they turned unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. So what you can see here is Lot's responding just about like Abraham did in the last chapter. He basically washing their feet, giving them a meal, baking bread, and doing all that stuff because he recognizes who they are. And that's one positive thing about Lot. He still sees what's going on. But notice that he's at the gate coming into the city, which means he's probably a pretty high level person now. You know why? Think about what happened after he came back from being captive, and everybody says, oh, you're a hero, and all that kind of stuff. So basically, he got put elevated position from all that when they did the raid back and then. And then when you look back and look on down to verse 19, verse 9, they said, stand back, and they said again, this one fellow came into sojourn. This is the men of Sodom. In other words, this guy, Lot, came in and just to sojourn and everything else. He will needs to be a judge. Now we will deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break down the door. So they really didn't care about Lot's position. Because they was willing to break down the door and basically do whatever necessary to get at these two men, two angels. So, but he was still righteous. Okay? Even though he had vexed his spirit a lot from what was done in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 through 8, and delivered just Lot. But notice how it says it, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them in seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with the unlawful deeds. So Lot was actually still a righteous man, but he kept basically just getting further and further away the more that he was with them. And so that was the main thing there. And if you start thinking about how Lot's influence is in that city, it's not very high. Even though he was a righteous man, he didn't influence them, they influenced him. Okay? Now, Brother Wayne said something about it. Charlie Kirk has influenced the people the other way. People can say whatever they want. He has made an impact on college and high school age kids in the positive direction. And there's not too many people like that anymore. They'll just stand no matter what. And I really appreciate his testimony for what he did. And his wife showed just as much character as well. And although it's tragic and wrong, I don't think we realize what she said about awakening that spirit. I believe, and you never know if God had to allow it to happen, okay? But you never know what his overall purpose that might actually trigger. To let it be to where that he was a martyr for his Christian faith. You can say whatever you want to politically, but the thing about it is everything he believed in was based on his Christian faith. So that was the bottom line that actually triggered his whole belief system that he had. And for this country and everything else, and I think I've heard, and I hadn't even realized this, I think 11 out of the 13 colonies that became the first states, the 13 first states, their constitution required them to be believers, to be a part of that state. You can imagine, and he knew that, and he recognized that background. And so I gave him a lot of credit for what he's done and what the Lord has allowed him to do. Because he gave God the credit for allowing him to do that. But we see Lot was the exact opposite. He had no influence whatsoever. But in verse 4, it says, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto them, Where are the men which came in unto thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly." He knew when they said they wanted to know him, what that meant. Okay? And this is the part that really throws your mind a little bit. "Behold, now I have 2 daughters, which have not known man." In other words, they were virgins. "Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing. For therefore came they under the shadow of my roof." What a sad state Lot was in. And basically the wicked state of that city, like back in the days of Noah, like we said last week, they were as it was in the days of Lot, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And we're there. As far as we're there as a country, as a world, it's just a matter of how much longer God's going to let it go.
Yes, sir.
And the angry mob gathering outside his house, they wanted to do wicked things to those angels. Of course, they didn't realize it was an angel because they just figured it was men. Because that's the way they are. That's the way angels are. They're not women. They don't have wings. They're basically male beings from the standpoint of, just like we saw over in Genesis chapter 6, where they went into the daughters of men and had giants and everything else in that land. And even in Sodom and Gomorrah, they had some. Because that's what had also been happening here. But once men and women give into the wickedness, God allows them to be turned over to reprobate minds. Romans 1:27-28. "Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient." Did you notice how Lot referred to the men of Sodom as brethren. That's what he called them. Notice there, let's see, verse 7, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. He was in bad shape. He had vexed his soul. And of course, you start seeing it even in further when we start seeing more toward the latter part of the chapter. He had gotten, and he had zero influence on his daughters. I mean, basically the wickedness of that city had basically come down and basically impacted his whole family. And he had zero influence in anybody but the fact that he recognized them for who they were. Verse 11, it says, and they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn. He will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee, talking about Lot, than with them. In other words, we're going to tear you up if you don't basically let us have them. That's basically what they're saying. And he pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house. In other words, jerked him back in, and shut the door, and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. Lot is the one fellow that they're referring to as a judge, condemning their attempts. But basically, think about it, the language in today's language. Think about it this. Look at this bum. He came drifting through. Look at this bum. In other words, the people are looking at Lot and saying, hey, look at this bum here. He came drifting through here looking for a handout, and now he wants us to run to the circuit court. Who does he think he is anyway? Talking about Lot. Because he's a judge or some sort of powerful person, but all they're saying is, we don't care about you. You're nothing to us. But the angels, all they had to say is blindness. And they basically lost their way and probably did not receive their sight again. Unless the Lord lifted it up so they could see the fire and brimstone coming down the next morning. But this is at evening time, and basically he's asked them to stay for the next morning. But then verse 12, it says, and the men said unto Lot, hast thou here any besides? In other words, you got anybody else here besides who's in this house? Because they refer back to Abraham's prayer in the last chapter where he basically said, 10 or more. Surely Abraham's thinking, surely Lot's got some folks down there that he's one. But notice what happens. Is thou here any besides son-in-law and thy sons and thy daughters and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law. He's got some more daughters, which married his daughters, and said, up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. In other words, they just mocked him and said, what, you believe that junk? We're having fun. No, don't, forget it. And basically he has zero influence on anybody else in that city. And when you sit down and think about it, these angels, they have the power to, basically cause the blindness and destroy the city. But the other angels, they're just messengers. Okay? You see in Revelation 2 and 3 how each one of the angels to the church, they're messengers from that standpoint. And then, but you get on into Revelation. The angels are the ones that basically hand out the plagues and everything else throughout the book of Revelation. And there's some powerful angels out there that can do some things that we don't even think about. And so these two angels are the destroyers that God sent. Notice in verse 15 through 16. Now this is recognized when the morning arose. In other words, it ain't quite sunrise yet. Okay? It's basically getting close, but it's not there yet. Then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and the 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. In other words, they're not going to give no more patience. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of the 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. These 2 guys basically said, you're going, regardless of whether or not you want to, or ready or not. Ready or not, here we go. And and they were probably sitting there, you can probably imagine, oh, no, we need to take all this stuff that we got and all this, and try to figure out how to get it all together and all that stuff. Time's up. Time's up. Remember, Lot's wife was probably an Egyptian that was already probably fairly familiar with all the wickedness that was going on in that city from Egypt's standpoint. And we're not quite to sunrise, and it's time to get out. And they went down into the land with plenty of riches. And what does he leave with? Nothing. Sin will take you farther than you ever thought it would take you. And it'll cost you a whole lot more than what you ever thought it would do. And it's just not worth it. And so the angels had to take them out of the city to remove them from before destruction. And they were probably fairly reluctant to leave at this time in the morning. So notice it said, while he lingered. And while he lingered, the men, in other words, they were just not wanting to go. Sin had a grip on them. And then get down to verse 17. It came to pass when they had brought them forth abroad, and he said, Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. In other words, that's a fairly big area because the whole plain was, but notice what happens. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. In other words, the plan was to destroy everything in that plain that Lot had pitched his tent toward and saw all that was good, fertile ground. It is no longer. No longer is it fertile ground. But notice it says, and Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my Lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight. Here we go. And thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed me unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me, and I die. If you stay here, you're going to die too. But he's told him to go to the mountain. And behold, now this city is near to flee into, and it is a little one. So he's saying, let me go over here to this one. It's a lot smaller than the rest of them, so they're probably okay not to burn it down. That's really what he's saying. He's saying, it's probably not so wicked that we can't spare it since it's so small. Says, Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. In other words, the angels gave in to him. And they're going to let him go there. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. And that's one of the same cities we get with Sodom. It's pretty much the same type of situation. But basically, they're trying to get them out of the city. They've done the hard work of getting them out. But now Lot's saying, well, that's too far for me. And there's probably animals and everything else. I don't want to go up there. Let me go over here in this other city. And let me get over there so I can, and probably it was probably a little bit closer. And probably not very far away. So here they are. And but I guarantee you, after that little saying there toward the end there, it says, for the which thou hast spoken, haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything. In other words, he started getting the picture. I need to get out of here. But notice back in chapter 13 verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes, and behold, all the plain of Jordan, this is all the plain, and it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. And Zoar is probably the city that he went to. And he begs the angels to allow him into that small city. Probably just still is wicked, because he knows the city. It's not that far away. And they agree, but destruction is still coming. And the thing about it is that Lot is probably leading the way. His 2 daughters behind him, and the wife is picking up the rear. Okay? But what did the angels tell him? Don't look back. So notice how it comes back. The solemn warning made to not look back at any time meant that Lot was probably in the lead. And he gets over there, and they get over to the city of Zoar. And just in my own mind, there may have been 7 righteous souls there in Zoar. You know why? Because 7 plus Lot plus 2 daughters makes 10. Because the mother didn't make it. So there might have been 7 folks over there that were still righteous, to where he basically had to spare them because of Abraham's plea and agreement with God. That's just speculation, but more than likely that probably was the situation. And the thing about it is, you look at Matthew 24, during the tribulation period that's going to be happening then, when basically the Antichrist, basically Satan's cast out of heaven, and Antichrist basically indwells in the Antichrist as the spirit, and then he starts going after the Jews. What does Matthew 24 tell them? Verse 17, it says, let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath. Abraham's prayer definitely rang true, because he couldn't destroy Sodom until Lot had gotten out. Period. And it wasn't because there was 10 righteous souls. It was just because he was interceding for Lot. And verse 23, notice the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. So here's the sunrise. And Lot's just now getting there. And as soon as the sunrise got up and Lot got to the city of Zoar, what happens? Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Lot makes it in, and his brimstone is sulfur. If you know what sulfur is, it's basically a flammable rock. And that's what you get from meteorites coming in through the atmosphere. So I guarantee you, this was probably some sort of, God just basically sent meteorites and basically just burned and basically threw that city all to pieces. And fire and brimstone, and of course they're going to have eternal fire in hail and in lake of fire. It's basically one of those things that's going to happen. But notice that Lot looked back. Lot, when he got there, notice he couldn't look backward to see if everybody was following him. If he did, he turned to a pillar of salt. So he didn't know until he got there that his wife wasn't with him. Think about that. Here he is running to try to get away, and his daughters and everybody, and all of a sudden when he gets there, he turns around, bam, she's not there. Cost you more than you're willing to pay. So he never saw her again after they left and started heading towards Zoar. But notice now it turns over to Abraham. It says, and Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. Abraham realizes there's not 10 righteous souls. Right at that point. Because he had a deal with Christ. If there was 10 righteous souls, he wouldn't destroy it. Didn't make it. So you have to wonder at that time whether or not Abraham was worried about Lot, whether or not he even made it. Verse 29 says, and it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. God showed mercy to Lot for Abraham's sake, not for Lot's sake. Okay? Because he was the intercessor of prayer. And that's the reason why intercessory prayer is so important for us. I mean, can't emphasize that more than what you see here from the standpoint of Abraham being an intercessor for Lot. Lot didn't know what was coming. Okay? And you never saw him really doing much other than honoring these two angels. And he just basically, Abraham's prayer is what saved them completely. Now we get to the end product of what he basically bred while he was down in there in Sodom. Lot, he got into Zoar. That's where he wanted to go, right? Guess what? He didn't stay. You know probably why? Because the people of that city were just like Sodom and Gomorrah for the most part. And they knew Lot had escaped, and they wondered why he got escaped. So he was probably not on good terms with anybody in that city. Because he could have told other people to get out, but they didn't. So he dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar. Notice his fear. And he dwelled in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. So he ended up in the mountain after all. And the firstborn of his daughters said unto the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will be with him. We will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. And he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Sounds like Noah, don't it? Same situation when he got drunk and Ham went in. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. Don't sound like it was hard to get him drunk. So he was probably pretty used to it, wasn't he? It wasn't hard to get him drunk. And it says, and they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. So his daughters basically did things that shouldn't be happening. Okay? So the influence of Sodom and Gomorrah had already rubbed off on them too far. There's no other way to describe it. So, but when you look at what happened here, You have the two girls, they were, verse 36, thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son and called his name Benjamin. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So he's the father of his two grandsons. And if you think about that a little bit, here's some history of where they'll end up. Moabites, women, they caused Solomon to sin in Nehemiah and 1 Kings. The king of Moab hires Balaam to curse Israel. Remember Balaam, Balak, and all those. Eglon oppresses Israel. Intermarriage with the Moabites cost Israel how many? 24,000 casualties. They were Israel's perennial enemies for 500 years. And their country and their people are the objects of God's wrath at the second advent in Isaiah 16 and Jeremiah 48. So, didn't work out good for them. Ammonites, about the same. They inhabit the area northeast of Moab, which is close to Jordan. And they're prohibited from entering the congregation of Israel until 10 generations have passed since the first mixed marriage. They oppressed Israel in the book of Judges and refused to return land which belonged to Israel. They are Israel's enemies for 500 years, just like the Moabites, and they are listed with Moab as a target of judgment again in Second Coming, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. You can go look those up. But basically, eternal enemies with Israel. Similar to what the Arab countries in Ishmael is, not a whole lot different. So, Lot, but that's about the last you see of Lot for the most part. You don't see much of him after that. But God chose to put some history in there, and let me tell you, I'm glad that we have some people that'll stand up even in the midst of all the wickedness that's out here in this world. And it's not easy. I mean, right now, everything's at your fingertips. And so the temptations are always there. The temptation will always be there, and until the Lord comes back. But it can't be long. It can't be long. And anybody got anything they want to say or anything before we dismiss this morning? Okay. Amen. No. That's right. Yep. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think after Charlie died, there was a pretty good uptick in the people that actually joined his Turning Point. But after she spoke, it was like an exponential uptick of people who joined Turning Point. So there's a lot of people out there that's ready to start working at it. But we will only have to see how long it lasts. So, Brother Scott, would you dismiss us in word of prayer?